Well, we're happy to have James Corbett of the Corbett Report coming to us from Japan. Good morning, James.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about the coronavirus a little this morning. Now, being in Japan, so close to China, there must be mass panic where you are. Are people running for the hills as you look out your window?
Actually, it's quite the opposite. You would expect mass panic because, as we've seen in country after country with lockdowns, martial laws, quarantines, the specter of medical martial law being floated, you would expect that panic to be especially profound here in, or at least near the epicenter of this phenomenon in Japan, but you are not seeing that. And specifically because, although every authoritarian power structure benefits from the freak out that is happening right now, the Japanese government, strangely enough, has the exact opposite incentive. They are desperately trying to pretend that the Tokyo 2020 games are going to go ahead as usual, with spectators and everything. Everyone's going to come and it's going to be great because all of this will be gone in a few months, I guess they're thinking. Which is nonsense. But as long as they are continuing that charade, then they are going to make sure that there is no panic. They did close schools, but other than that, life goes on exactly as usual here. I think at the point that the games get officially postponed and or canceled is when we will see the hammer drop and people start to freak out, or at least people be told to freak out in the ways they are in other countries. But right now, we're being told not to freak out, so no one is freaking out. It's almost as if this is a psychological phenomenon.
Yes, and well, let's make a comparison between the attempt to not freak out here and then the freak out going on in the Western countries. I listened to a podcast of yours the other day where you mentioned you were astonished at how many people were so certain about the origin of this virus. And I'm kind of astonished at the level of certainty of the degree of danger that this virus has for us. Some people say it's the end of the world. Some people say it's a cold. But in any case, they certainly are making a big deal out of it. And my question would be, who benefits from this level of alarmism and drastic response? Or to put it another way, is this a crisis they're not going to let go to waste?
Yes, well, a very leading question, but you were exactly right to frame it that way, because we tend to think of this question of who benefits in the most literal sense of actual monetary profit. And there is obviously some of that on the table. For example, for the big pharmaceutical manufacturers, whoever comes up with the first vaccine to get to market is going to stand to reap billions upon billions of dollars as a result thereof. So there are direct financial incentives going on here. But in fact, the question of benefit in this sense is almost flipped on its head, because what we are seeing is essentially the controlled demolition of the economy is taking place before our eyes. We are going into 1929 and people are embracing it willingly this time. It isn't just a stock market crash. This is being brought on by people's willing embrace of this lockdown that's happening right now that is shutting down the global economy and is going to be used as a trigger for what myself and many others have been calling for many years, which is the end of the Ponzi scheme as it has existed in the post World War II Bretton Woods order is definitely coming to an end. And what is going to replace it is going to come from institutions like the Bank for International Settlements and the IMF and the World Bank and the other Bretton Woods institutions that have carefully laid a white paper infrastructure for the coming economic order, whatever that's going to look like. So I think that's where we have to look for the benefit in this case. It's kind of a strange way of thinking about it, because there are people who actually benefit from the collapse of the economic system and the draining of trillions of dollars of notional wealth from the economy, because there's money to be made on the way up and there's control to be made on the way down as the banks come in and scoop up the real world assets from the fleecing of the flock, exactly as happened during the Great Depression.
Yes, I think many people's first response to that would be, well, the 1% or the 0.1%, they certainly don't want the economy to crash, and why would they purposely crash it? But then you read some economists who say it has to crash anyway, and so they have a disaster or a pandemic ready to go as an explanation for it, whereas it's the system itself that eventually has to crash. What would you say to that?
I think that's the way to analyze this. The economy as it has been set up is deliberately a Ponzi scheme, and the people at the very top of that scheme have benefited from it greatly over the decades that it's been functioning in the way that it's functioned, with the fiat money trickling down to the banks first order, and eventually making some of that making its way down to Main Street at the end of the day. And as long as it's a rising tide, no one really questions the Ponzi scheme. But like every Ponzi scheme, at some point it becomes mathematically impossible to maintain that, and that's baked into the cake. And everyone has known it. And you can go back from years now of pronouncements in this post-Lehman collapse era where, as even mainstream economists have pointed out, 93% of the stock market rise from 2009 to 2016 was directly attributable to the money that was pumped in by the Federal Reserve. The central banks have dictated economic reality for the past decade, demonstrably so. And so that you've had the IMF and other institutions come out and warn this is a bubble. It's going to collapse at some point. So this has been baked into the cake. The only question is what will be the trigger to make this happen. It looks like coronavirus is going to be used as the trigger, which is especially convenient for the banksters who have manipulated and created this crisis, because then they get to blame this invisible enemy that's not even human. We can't, I mean, you're going to blame a germ? It was the germ that killed the economy. And they get to swoop in as the saviors with the solutions they've already got in place. We're going to see coordinated central bank actions, probably coordinated under the ultimate command of the Bank for International Settlements, exactly as conspiracy theorists, really conspiracy realists, have been warning about for decades, generations even, going back to, of course, Carol Quigley in Tragedy and Hope, who wrote about the Bank for International Settlements becoming this institution, a central bank of central banks that will coordinate all of the banks in the world. This is the financial order we're stepping into. This might sound crazy to a lot of people at this moment. I guarantee you a few years down the line, it will seem like just everyday common sense, of course. Well, the Bank for International Settlements came in and saved the economy. So thank you so much for doing that.
Right. Speaking of which, you say it could take 3 years, or it could be more immediate. And we don't know if this is the tripwire or if this is a step on the way. You made a poignant point in another broadcast you did where you said it may be that this isn't the trigger, but they're going to paint this when it's over as, look how the government stepped in, look how the market stepped in. I mean, if things do improve, let's say in a couple months, and then they want to give everybody the idea that, okay, now we can trust our government because look how they got us out of this mess. And once they have our trust, we're really in trouble.
Right. I think specifically in regards to the implementation of the lockdowns and the martial law that's clearly coming to some extent in the United States as a result of this, there is going to be National Guard on the streets, and they're going to be the one helping to hand out the food and make sure everything goes smoothly during this lockdown time, or at least as smoothly as possible. And everyone will hunker down and we'll get through it. And then in a few weeks or a few months or whenever they decide, they'll say, oh, okay, it's turned around now. And this horrible pandemic, which is mind-blowing and fear it like the Black Plague, will be reporting the other side of it, which is right now they could report, for example, in Italy, according to certain doctors, there's only been 2 deaths directly attributable to the coronavirus at this point. The rest all involved underlying conditions that were exacerbated by people who supposedly got this virus, and even the testing for the virus is questionable. But imagine that being reported from the other way. This is an exceptionally bad cold season where people with underlying conditions will be susceptible to this, so you better watch out. But imagine just mentally, every time you hear someone in the mainstream media saying coronavirus, just replace that with bad cold. 10,000 people came down with a bad cold today, and we have to shut down the entire global economy to combat this cold. It's nonsense, ludicrous nonsense on its face. No one would fall for it, but they just give it a strange foreign-sounding name like coronavirus, and people will go along with it. And then when they lift those restrictions in a few weeks, and most people are okay, yeah, some people died, but we got through it somehow or other, then it will look like, well, look, martial law wasn't so bad. And that's what I worry about. This could be a propaganda coup for the people who want to indoctrinate the public that this is a good thing.
Exactly. Well, to finish up, give us, I'm curious, what's going to replace this Ponzi scheme? Because obviously a new system will have to come into place. And do you have like a sort of a dystopian worst case scenario idea in your head about what they're planning?
It will involve some form of monetary reset. Obviously, the post-World War II era was supposed to work with the dollar linked to peg to gold, and everyone basically pegging to the dollar in some form or other. Obviously, that fell apart in early 1970s when Nixon took the dollar officially off the gold peg. And since that point, it has essentially been an international monetary order that has been based on the petrodollar, using the dollars that are garnered through by Saudi Arabia, essentially pricing oil in dollars and everyone else following suit, and then those dollars being recycled through the U.S. banking system. That has been essentially the order that has maintained the global financial system for the last few decades. That is clearly coming to an end for all sorts of different reasons that are also interestingly coming to a head at this exact moment as the oil markets are going absolutely crazy right now, and oil wars are taking place on the back of this coronavirus. That is coming to an end. So whatever is coming next is going to be a new monetary order. And for a decade plus, high-ranking officials at all sorts of different central banks, including the Chinese central bank and at the IMF and others, have argued for some form of internationally administered basket of currencies or something along the lines of an IMF special drawing rights to become the basis for international trade. And I could very much see this being the way to get that in the door, along with a million other agendas. I don't think this is the only single one, but it is one of the ones that's on the way. A new financial monetary order is coming. And just as a side note, I don't think this is going to be the thing that pushes it over the edge. But the WHO is now warning about that filthy paper cash that we handle. It's so much better to use cards. And I've been reading anecdotes of people who are already saying, tellers and working at shops don't even want to take your cash anymore. Please use your core card. I don't want to touch it. We are also being indoctrinated into or at least steeped into the idea that digital currency is coming, and it will be nationally administered. They will have access to all of the data about everything you spend at every moment of every day. That's the new order that we're stepping into.
Okay, last thing. You say that there are other agendas. Concurrent with everything you're talking about, do you foresee a ramping up of the police state and a further reduction of rights?
Yes, absolutely. That's already taking place just in the nature of lockdowns that have and shelter in place. It's again, even if all of this passes in a few weeks and everything is fine on the other side, the indoctrination, the precedent has been set in the minds of the public that this is something that we'll need to do from time to time whenever the authorities declare an emergency. All rights out the window, and just on the just being suspect of maybe potentially carrying this invisible virus that you may be asymptomatic. You don't know. Anyone could be a suspect. So this takes it even further than the war on terror paradigm, where anyone can be a terrorist. So we have to monitor everything everyone's doing. Now anyone can be carrying this disease, and they may not even know it. So you have to do whatever we say, and we will literally lock you in your house, essentially make you prisoners as a result of this. And people are cheering it on because I don't think enough people are looking at what this really means for the long term and the incredible precedents that are being set right at this moment. These are world historical times we are living through, and we have a say in it to a certain extent, whether we allow it to happen, whether we go along with it, or whether we fight this narrative that is being implanted in the public right now.
Okay, on that note, I think we'll end this. James Corbett, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on.